Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today Kristy Lewis, who is the founder and chief visionary officer of Quinn Snacks. I think you're really going to like this interview. I loved it. One thing about Quinn is that Quinn, when Kristy started it, she started it with a vision. She had a clear vision, and it wasn't just about making money or building a company. She had a vision. And I remember the first time I tried the pretzels that are filled, I loved it. And I went to the website, and I found out that they actually have a place on the website where it lists the ingredients that are in the foods, where they come from, and why they're in the product in the first place. It's quinnsnacks.com. But it's quite interesting, and I talk about this during the podcast at the end, but I had just read two books at the same time. One was Made in America by Sam Walton, his autobiography, and also Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. But they are two people that clearly started with a mission and stuck with it for a long time. And Kristy has made a number of videos on her website that describe her vision. I think you can find them on YouTube too. I think that's where I watched most of them. But if you read through the website, you get a feel pretty quickly for what her passion is and what her mission is. And she's now into this for over 13 years. And it all started with her enjoying, instant popcorn you put in the microwave, and she realized there were some problems with it, and she wanted to be able to snack healthy. But we also talk about in the podcast about how, it seems like the zeitgeist in the country right now is in favor of transparency of ingredients, knowing where ingredients come from. But one thing you'll notice when you listen to this podcast is that Kristy is not just in this for building a great business, although I think she is doing that. She wants to change policies. She wants to change the industry. And but again, with my supply chain background, I really appreciate the challenges she went through to try to understand the sources of ingredients she's using, and how those farmers are actually growing these products. And you'll hear more about that. I think we could do 3 or 4 podcasts on this topic. There were so many things else I wanted to get into with her on this. But I really think you're going to enjoy it. This is the first podcast in this series that I've done of a consumer products company, an earlier stage consumer products company. But again, Kristy has been at this for over 13 years, And any of you who have started businesses will know it takes a lot of perseverance to continue. It's very challenging to start a business like that from scratch. And she actually started the company a few days after her first son was born. And you'll hear the origin of the name of the company when you listen to the podcast. I hope you really enjoy it. Thank you. Kristy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.
Hey, Kristy, can you tell me just a little bit about the founding principles and mission of Quinn Snacks? And also, how did the idea really even come about in the first place?
Yeah, so the founding mission, it's changed over time, because when we started this back in 2010, the idea was to reimagine microwave popcorn. And now, we've since unfortunately discoed microwave popcorn the last couple of months, and we're totally focused on our pretzel business. But the idea really stemmed from child of the 80s, grew up with Jiffy Pop and microwave popcorn, and really loved that iconic Americana classic snack. It was a go-to of mine. And when I was in my 20s, I started becoming kind of obsessed with this really farmers market scene. I was living in New York City near Union Square, and I was trying to connect the dots between what I was seeing at the farmers market and what I was seeing in the grocery store. And they were two very separate things, right? And so that really, I was working at this little hole-in-the-wall organic juice little store in the East Village, and kind of putting all the dots together. And it really came back to this, classic snack that I loved growing up, which was microwave popcorn. And so my then boyfriend, now husband, was relocated to Florida, and I moved down with him. And same thing, really cool farmers markets in Florida. I hated my job. I was in this publishing position, hated it. And every night I came home and my vice was microwave popcorn. But I realized how horrible this was, like peeling back, all the junk in the inside of the bag. And all these studies came out saying that the PFOAs and these, carcinogens were leaching into our popcorn kernels. And this artificial pat of butter, didn't make any sense to me. So I started experimenting using a paper bag and just organic popcorn kernels, and putting flavorings on top, like Parmesan and dried rosemary. We were testing with, maple sugar and all these really fun flavors. And so fast forward 8 years later, I kept thinking someone was going to put a healthier, safer alternative out there into the marketplace. Paul Newman's, I thought Orville would do something. And they didn't. And so when I was pregnant with I have 3 boys. When I was pregnant with my first son, Quinn, I went back to eating, making my microwave popcorn myself, and then realized, okay, it's now or never. We should just do this. So 3 days after he was born, I jumped in, and I haven't looked back since.
Wow. Well,
that's the
now
story.
I know. I was going to ask you how you got the name Quinn, and now I know the answer to that question. But there aren't many people that have a baby and then a few days later start a company.
Yeah. And I don't know if I highly recommend that, to be honest. It was really intense. And I had just been, dreaming about this idea for 8 years. If you can imagine, obviously what that's like. It's like you're obsessing about this and no one's doing it. And Quinn, the baby Quinn, never slept. So I was just working 24/7 around the clock as a new mom trying to figure this out. And then my husband, Coulter, bought me, and this was back in 2010. So he bought me one of those operator headsets. So I would just be on calls trying to figure this out nonstop. And then Quinn was, on my hip or in the laundry basket. I was playing with him while I was talking on the phone, and it was pretty exhausting. I'm really surprised I made it out of those first 3 years alive. But it was the only way. It was the only way to do it.
Well, I mean, what a great story. I know you've pivoted in terms of your product, but your story is really good. I mean, you had a problem and you've solved it. And then you said, we can solve this in a broader way. But there's so many, that's the quintessential entrepreneurial mindset. And very, very, when I was reading through your website and watching some of your videos, I could tell you were passionate about this. And in some ways, I know you've been doing this for quite a few years, but it almost seems like the zeitgeist in the country right now is more inclined towards this kind of an idea than ever. And even me personally, I've really never paid much attention, but about a year ago, I started paying more attention to ingredients and things like that, packaging. And now, we've heard about the micro particles of plastic, and I don't know much about it, that are in water bottles. It's like, it seems like there's so many cases where we need to get back to more basic kinds of ingredients and processes.
Well, that was exactly the idea, Matt, was the logic of Back to Basics. And if you know the brand Back to Basics, we clearly couldn't name this company Back to Basics. But the idea around it was, how do we really messed up. Like in the last couple of decades, we've gone sideways. And since, 2010, we've recovered that. There are a lot of brands out there, obviously, in the better for you space trying to do good, which is amazing. But when we started, there weren't as many. And so taking a step back of even trying to secure popcorn kernels, we could not get the information we wanted. We would go to, a distributor, because we were tiny. We were trying to secure like 100 pounds. And we couldn't really get any information on who was growing it, where it was grown, and how it was grown. And as a consumer, that really honestly pissed me off, because I felt like if the manufacturer doesn't know where it's coming from, the consumer definitely doesn't know where it's coming from. And I, as a consumer, wanted to know where my food was coming from. And so I think that led me to push harder when we were looking for our ingredient suppliers, ask them questions, and if they couldn't provide us the answers, we would say, okay, well, we're not going to use you then. One incident where I was trying to figure out maple sugar, and this is a funny story, and I called everywhere, Canada, we were living in Boston, so obviously Vermont, and we couldn't find what we needed. We needed dehydrated maple sugar, pure dehydrated maple sugar, nothing in it. And finally I called Butternut Mountain Farms, and I spoke to this guy, Stu, and he gave me truckload pricing right out of the gate because he was really excited about what we were trying to do. And we still use them, or we did. Actually, no, we do. We use it in our maple almond nuggets, but we've used them for like over a decade now. And so I think I personally think it was really important to make sure that our consumers knew where everything was coming from, even if it wasn't what we were proud of. So we established our transparency policy, which was farm to bag. And that was, we list everything on our site, and it would actually hold us to be more accountable of, okay, well, this is on our site. We're really not proud of this, but we'll dig deeper and we'll do better, right? And so that farm to bag evolved into our Be Better, Do Better initiative at Quinn, which was, it's not just about transparency, but it's about truly understanding like how these growers are growing our product. And that led me to dig into regenerative agriculture and learn more about that, which we can get on to later. But yes, like your back to basics comment was 100% where we were at.
Well, I remember when Procter and Gamble came out with their deodorant that's very simple. I don't know if you've seen that before.
I don't. I mean, Tom's of Maine, I think, was one of the first, but and they're owned by P&G, right? Or maybe I'm mistaken. I can't remember.
I don't know. Let me see here.
But so, yes,
Native
is Native.
Native.
That's a great. Yeah.
So what I thought was, and the reason I'm even bringing this up, and I couldn't remember the name right off the top of my head, although I use it. It's a Procter and Gamble product. But they realized that people were interested in what you're talking about, a simple list of ingredients, knowing what it is and where it's coming from, and but the price point's pretty high. And I remember the first time I saw it at Walmart, I thought, I don't see how this is going to sell at Walmart, but it has. It sells like crazy. And again, that's why I said I think the zeitgeist in the country is such that Quinn is well positioned right now to really take off. And I know I've talked to other people about that. Do you get that sense that the zeitgeist is in this direction?
100%, absolutely. And I think that native is a really good case study at Walmart for sure, because that price point is so significantly higher. But with all the studies coming out, and I think they've been coming out now for decades, honestly, about deodorant causes cancer and breast cancer and all these different cancers, that they are steering away from the chemical deodorants and going to the natural deodorants. Consumers are. And also, larger companies are making sure that they have an option for those consumers looking for the simple pronounceables, right? And so 100%, I do think that it's taken a little bit of time, but I really hope and believe that this entire industry is shifting towards all being better for you. I think that, Frito and some of the big guys need to question what they're really doing with their snacking choices for consumers, because what I've seen is my kids have grown up in this industry. I have a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old.
And your 13-year-old's Quinn, right?
It's Quinn. Yep, exactly. And he's actually going to high school next year, which is crazy. He's the baby of the grade. But I've seen that whole evolution with snacking change in my house. Like first, like you're as a parent, you're purchasing, right? So you can make the purchase decisions and your kids will eat what you buy because that's the only thing that they're getting. But once they go to elementary school, they're exposed to what their friends are eating. And a lot of those friends are bringing, Costco-based items, which is great. I shop at Costco every week. But a lot of the times it's, your Lay's or your Doritos or your Takis or whatever it is. Artificial flavors, artificial ingredients, which we don't use. We don't even use natural flavors at Quinn. But as a parent, you really don't, you have no control, right? Because they're seeing that at school and then they're coming home, or, they're buying it at the store when they go with their friends. Like, I think that's the biggest challenge. And my argument back is like, we can only control what we can control in our household. So give families the option to purchase higher quality foods for their families. But when they're out of the house, you have no control. But Frito and the Pepsi, they do, right? And so it's their choice. And I would just say, like, they should be questioning themselves. They can do better and it doesn't have to cost as much, but they're training those kids now to eat like that. So they're eating behaviors. So it's really interesting, the conversations we have in the car and at home all the time now, because they're like, why can't we just buy normal snacks? And I'm like, because you can't.
Well, I was listening to a podcast. I'm forgetting who it was. It was either Andrew Huberman or Peter Attia. I don't remember which one. But they were talking about fructose.
Yes.
And how fructose is, really horrible for you. It's like, I had no idea. I just thought, well, it's another sugar, But it is another sugar, but it is terrible in terms of how it affects your metabolic health and even your desire to eat more. It's addictive.
Totally. And I just read a study because I was doing some research on ADHD, and the ADHD, either if you're a kid or you're an adult, you seek that dopamine hit. And so you're constantly seeking that sugar. So in our house, like, we really can't have sugar in our house because like my kids will just like flock to this sugar. And they did a study on mice, how the mice prefer sugar versus cocaine. And so which is crazy, right? I mean, I just read that yesterday. And so I think that, as manufacturers, I think we have 1 or 2 grams of sugar in our pretzels, which I'm even annoyed by. But it's not super crazy. But I do think like the fructose, high fructose syrup, spikes your glycemic index, and it causes all sorts of issues, as you just, heard. But we have a huge problem with how we produce and make food. And it doesn't need to be that way. Also, how we grow food, because how we grow food, how we produce food, how we manufacture these ingredients lead to that outcome. So you're almost like you have to start from scratch. Again, going back to your basics comment, like go back to basics.
Well, I noticed in going through your website and watching some of your videos, you have, it seems like you have a really strong commitment to working with farmers and this idea of regenerative growing practices. Could you speak to those two things?
Sure. Yeah. So the regenerative growing practices for me, and everyone has their different take on it. Some do it because, captures more carbon and it's better for the environment. And yes, that's obviously a really good thing, right? And some are more focused on the nutrient density piece of the output that's coming out of that. The other piece is, focused on the health of the soil and planet health and human health. And for us, like getting into regen really started with me questioning how ingredients were grown. And this disconnect between you have less than 1% of organic over here, of organic farming, and you have 99% over here. And I think we have about 893 million acres of farmland in the US, ish. And less than that is 1%, right? And so my question was like, okay, well, why are we like, there's so much focus on the organic, which is really, really important. And I'm a huge believer in organic. We used organic popcorn from Green Place for 13 years when we were in microwave popcorn. But there was not enough focus over here in the 99%. There was this huge gap in this middle space that we weren't really touching we weren't touching. Growers were clearly doing a lot of things there. And regen wasn't a thing back in 2013 and 2015 when we were starting to really talk about it. Now everyone really understands regenerative agriculture in our space, consumers less so. But so the idea behind that was in order for land to be regenerative, for me, was how do we reduce and eliminate insecticides and pesticides over time, right? And in order to have regenerative land, you can't actually stop putting the pesticides and insecticides on the land without that land living, right? Because like if you look at, and there's a video I'll send you, Matt, if you haven't seen it, but we did a video and it was really interesting to see all these farmers talk about like the living soil. And this was, when I knew nothing about this. I'm from Connecticut, so I like zero experience with this, but it was really fascinating because when you're growing in dead soil, you have to keep adding these fertilizers and nutrients and all this stuff. But if you leave it alone, like Mother Nature actually does that for you, right? You don't need to put all of those inputs in. You don't need to spray because the ecosystem's solving for itself, right? And so that was really interesting for me because, again, going back to we need to clean up our food system, a big portion of that was to get rid of the chemicals or lessen the amount of pesticides we spray on our land. Because the pesticide is absolutely outrageous, the amount of pesticides we spray on our land. And then we started to understand, okay, in order to have living soil, you have to introduce, livestock. You have to don't touch the land, leave it covered. So less tillage, minimal tillage, crop rotation, diverse crops. So you're really kind of creating this ecosystem. And so it's not just a dead piece of land with nothing thriving. You go to, our organic popcorn grower, you would go to his farm and there would be butterflies and pigs and manure and it was this magical place in the middle of Nebraska. Like truly you drive on corn belts, right? And you're going and you're driving out there and it's just corn and soy and corn and soy. And then you land upon Grain Place and it's like truly this oasis in the middle of this corn belt. And so that was it was this eye-opening experience of we need to get there. Like our nation and our country, we need to get over here. If you look at other countries, like there's a lot of that, but we don't really have much of that at all. So that was the biggest thing for me. And it's a huge passion of mine because I do think if you change the system, like the farmers will thrive. They'll get more for their crops, but they also produce a more nutrient dense crop, which is really cool. There are studies that, if you take a crop in the 1950s versus, I think, the early 2000s, the 1950s crop had higher nutrients, higher minerals, and now the crop has much less. And so again, going back to the basics, is we need to get back there. We need to make sure that our output is high in minerals, high in vitamin K and E and D and everything. So that's a big focus for us.
That's really interesting. I'd love to talk to you more about that. And, so I remember when I first met, right after my wife and I got married in 1986, I met her grandfather, who was, I think, in his mid to late 90s, but he was still cognitively pretty strong. He's been dead quite a long time now, but at any rate, he was in the produce business in Denver, close to where you are.
Okay.
Back, a long time ago, of course, and he eventually sold that business. But he told me, because he knew I was really interested in logistics, he told me that when he was very young, growing or selling, I can't remember which, he wasn't in Denver at that time, but he was growing and selling watermelons. And the problem was they couldn't ship them very far because, like, if they put them in a rail car, their rind was so thin they would be destroyed. Even one layer, you definitely couldn't stack them. So they started, manipulating that. I guess, what do you call it? Making hybrids. I'm way out of my territory here.
No, you're good. Keep going. And now the rinds are you going with the rinds are so thick now?
The reason they did that was for transportation. He said when he was very young, the first watermelons he saw, you could just stick your fingers in and pull it apart.
No way.
And he said, and he told me this in 1986. And at that time he was already in his late 90s. But he told me that it tasted different back then. He said he's never been able to find watermelons that tasted like they did back then. Now, again, that's anecdotal, I know, but you hear so much like this, Now, you have a scientific study you're talking about there that is interesting.
No, it's taste, right? And we always say if we can't deliver high quality flavor or taste, like, we're dead in the water. But I do think that watermelon story is so interesting because we just had this discussion around seedless watermelons with my kids. And they were like, well, this watermelon has seeds in it. And I was like, we grew up, eating watermelon and spitting the seeds out. That was just like how we did it, right? There was no seedless watermelon. And it's really sad because it's kind of like the ease, the comfort of, well, we don't want to have a watermelon with seeds. We don't want to spit it out. It's like too time consuming. So we're making it easier for everybody, but we're taking out kind of that flavor. He was totally right. Like we had a watermelon, I think it came from the Palisades in Colorado, so out west. And he probably would have approved of the taste, but I've never tasted any watermelon like that in my life. It was like the most amazing watermelon I've ever had. And we've gotten away from that. So we've really gotten away from like what food should be. And we've made it something else. And we need to get back there. So yeah, that story is pretty sad, actually.
It is.
His watermelon story.
Well, when he told me this, I was kind of curious about it. And I talked to a friend of mine that was a professor in the College of Agriculture here at the University of Arkansas. And he gave me a bunch of other examples. I don't remember what they are now because this was quite a while back. But at any rate, the other thing I always wonder about is how much government agriculture regulations subsidy plays into this because, ethanol is an example. There's a lot of questions about does this even make sense to have ethanol and gas? But originally, I think there was a good intention there. But
I do. I think before you guys New Road invested in Quinn, and you can take this out if you want, but this is an interesting story. We were talking to some other funds, and one of this fund, I won't mention the name, but It was a lot of ex-Monsanto guys. And for me, it was really hard because I loved that you could take this mindset and do good with it, right? And so I was really interested actually in this group. But the first call, I just kind of, and they were really high up executives from Monsanto. So we were talking like the CEO was on the call, and the president, the former CEO, former president, and I met one of the original ones who created, GMOs, and for me it was like, gosh, why would you do this? And I was so naive at the time. This was a couple of years ago, and it's amazing how much you learn in a couple of years. But I was kind of an ass. So I was like, well. Explain to me like why you came from here and why you want to do good over here, right? Because we obviously stand for non-GMO project and, organic and regenerative. And it was really fascinating because my just assumption was they were not evil, but like, I can't believe that they did this. And when they started talking, the reality is that they were trying to prevent like mass starvation in the world. And such good intentions. And yes, it did go sideways a little bit, but like they did what they set out to do, right? And so it's just really interesting because your point is, I think so many people, most of people have good intentions, right? And sometimes it backfires, it goes sideways. But the start of that was a good intention. And so I think a lot of these companies, like, yes, the start is usually good intentions. But we need to get back more into questioning our intentions and why we're doing what we're doing. Because if you keep questioning yourself, maybe you're like, oh, well, we started here. Now we're over here. We have to get back to here. So.
I sometimes wonder how much more corn do we grow because of the ethanol regulations? I don't know, but I think it's a lot.
I think it's a lot. Yeah. I don't know that stat.
But, and variety is the other thing, there's more and more research showing that we need a lot of variety in our diet, and packaging. There's just so many issues here. Well, it's really encouraging to hear what you're doing. And again, when I went through your website and read and watched some of your videos, I realized you're on to something. I really think you are. It's great timing. So I'd like to switch gears just for a moment. You have a mantra in your company called Progress, Not Perfection. I noticed this. So I can't remember if it was on a video or in your website. What do you mean by that, and how do you implement that?
Yeah, so I think the progress versus perfection came from, I'm such a perfectionist by nature, like starting this business, just so detailed oriented and OCD and everything that you could imagine. And I realized, like, as we were going through this, it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't, I know that the industry needs a North Star and they need, ROC, which is regenerative organic, or they need organic. But in between all that, there's transitional, there's just regenerative, which is an organic, and then you have conventional. And so when we were trying to work with our growers on how do we reduce and eliminate chemical inputs over time, synthetic chemical inputs over time, where do we start there? Because we don't want to dictate what they can and cannot do. We want to help them get there. And by helping them get there, it's not in 12 months. It's not in 24 months. Like, they can't really do any of that until their soil is healthy, right? They can't reduce any of those chemicals until their soil is healthy. And so that means starting in there's 6 pillars of regenerative ag. It's picking a couple and starting there. And then over time, they can reduce their amount of spray. And when we started talking about this and thinking about it, the idea was, let's not be perfect. We can't be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. And obviously we've all heard that. But it truly is in this case. Because if we just focus on being perfect, then it's going to take everyone much longer to do good in their ag practices. And that, 800 to 900 million acres of land in the US, if we focus on being perfect, we're never going to get anywhere. And so that was our mission of just, again, progress. We're not stopping. We never ever have like a final thing that we're working on. Like, okay, we're good here. We're good here. We never say that, actually. We never say, okay, we're done here. It's like, no, there's progress. We always want to progress. We always want to evolve. If that's our ingredient supplier involvement, if that's, we just tweaked our nugget shell, which was really hard. It took us about a year to tweak it. but we knew it was hard and we wanted to get a softer, crunchier bite. And so we're always seeking to progress. And that's just kind of how we live over here, because if you stop learning and progressing, then there's not really a point. Like, why are we doing what we're doing, right? So that's a big thing that we live by.
Well, I've tried I think you call them filled pretzels.
Yes.
The first time I tried it, well, it was actually at a New Road meeting, and I was very new. Really wasn't familiar with Quinn Snacks yet, but they had it for as a part of the lunch. I was eating it, I thought, well, this is really good. But then again, at that point, I didn't even know much about it. I didn't know who had invested or anything. But I really liked it, and I took a picture of it and sent it to my wife. And then I went to your website. One of the things I noticed on your website that I really liked is you have a place on your website called like Trace Our Ingredients or something like this. Is it still there?
It is. So it's our farm to bag page, and we're revamping that language because everyone's doing farm to bag something. So we started the farm to bag back before it was like cool. So we're trying to evolve that positioning. But yes, it's still there. So you can click on an ingredient and our suppliers will come up.
Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. And you, not only do you say where it comes from, but you also say why you use it.
Mm-hmm.
What made you think to do that?
Yeah, so I think it's just important for consumers to know like the ingredients that we're using. I mean, some ingredients that we're using, like xanthan gum, for instance, is something that I really have been trying to get out of our pretzels. But since we're a gluten-free product, you need that gum to kind of adhere all the starches and to create kind of more of a wheat protein gluten structure. So we want to make sure people understand that we're not just throwing that in there to throw it in there. There's like a functionality piece of that ingredient. Same thing with, vitamin E and our sorghum. Our sorghum is whole grain, but a gluten-free crop. And so we really just want to make sure, and we're going to evolve that over time. We're working on a big project right now, which we're excited about, to provide consumers more information on why those ingredients are in there. But again, it was all about the idea around transparency. If someone wants to know, it's there. If you don't really care, that's fine. But at least we're giving the information so they understand.
And, I know that you're in Boulder, Colorado, and somewhere on your website or in a video, you mentioned something about the importance of the location even. How have you found that to be helpful to be in Boulder?
Yeah, so Boulder is a pretty special place. We started this in Boston in 2010, and there was like a big tech boom happening in Boston, and not much food was going on there. There's the farmers markets and some artisanal brands for sure. But I felt like every time I was calling people in Boulder or in San Francisco in this like out west area to learn more, because when we started this, I literally had no idea what we were doing. like zero business experience. I wanted to be a journalist. Like I had zero idea. I didn't know what a P&L was. Like really, we're talking like nothing. And so I had to lean on a lot of people, and I just kept finding that there was this like incredible ecosystem out here in Boulder. You have Celestial Seasons. Mo started it here, which is a huge company, obviously, right now. Horizons Milk, organic milk, started out here. And so all those founders were here. You had, Steve Demos from Soy, the Silk is Soy, whatever. So you had the Silk brand, you had Horizons, Mark Resloff, you had Justin from Justin's. Like, there are all these old school founders and new founders out here. And there was this incredible community. Naturally, Boulder was out here, or is out here. And so I just felt like we were lacking that where we were. And also the lifestyle grind out east is way different than out here. I mean, I remember getting up at Quinn never slept, so I was always up. But 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, we'd go to the warehouse in Woburn, probably more around 8 o'clock. And then we wouldn't get home until 6 or 7 p.m. at night. And it was dark in the winter in Boston. And it was just this like, you're killing yourself starting this startup and as a new parents. And it's just not a way to live. Like my husband and I were like, this isn't worth it. Like this whole scenario, I mean, the company was, but our lifestyle was not worth it. And so we realized like we really should just relocate. And so out here is just very different. I mean, you still work really hard, right? And in the early years, we were, especially when I was having I had 2 babies after Quinn, raising money. And I remember just getting so many speeding tickets because I'd be at the warehouse and then racing back to check on the baby and feeding the baby and then coming back. And I mean, I got so many speeding tickets, which is unfortunate. But I think it was more around like there's a permission to just settle and not be in overdrive just for the sake of overdrive. If you have a coffee meeting, or maybe it's not a coffee meeting, maybe it's a hiking meeting. Maybe you guys, instead of going to get coffee, like if I needed to talk to a founder about something, we'd go for a walk or we'd go for a hike. And it was just this all-encompassing lifestyle shift for us that I really do think allowed us to succeed through all of the craziness in the last couple of years.
Well, I didn't know that about Boulder having so many founders of organic and just healthy kind of foods. That's interesting. The reason I find it interesting is you find these industrial clusters all over the country, and you're right. Being able to get mentoring from them or advice is absolutely invaluable.
Oh, for sure. I definitely would not be here if I didn't have the mentorship and advice. And even the founders who are, started a couple of years before me. So they're a little bit ahead of us, but, even sitting down for dinner with them or going for a hike with them is really invaluable. So surrounding yourself with the industry and the founders and that ecosystem, we would never have been able to survive without that knowledge, because it was extremely helpful professionally and personally. So it was great.
So where do you see, I know you've also been trying to impact policy in the industry, not just your own product. But where do you see Quinn going in the future? What's your vision for the future? What are some of your goals?
Yeah, so I do believe that if we can create case studies with our growers to move them from conventional to more of regenerative practices and reducing the chemical inputs over time is instrumental. So I think if we can create more of those case studies and create a company that stands for good, that actually is doing well and growing, then the larger companies will have to kind of shift their mindset, which they do over time. But it's less about product innovation for me. It's more about the change that we have in our land and our system. Because if they can see that and consumers start demanding more of it, and consumers won't demand more of this for another 25 years. Like we're really, I mean, it's going to take a long time for consumers to understand that, like organic, right? And consumers are just starting to understand organic and how it's important. And again, it's less than 1% so of land. Obviously, it's more. But I do think that regen's is a foreign word for so many consumers, but it doesn't mean that we don't do it. Like it means that we have to keep doing it, right? So it's deliver flavor, deliver promise of a salty snack that tastes good and is better for you, while also doing all the good stuff underneath. And so I think for us, long term is really just keep creating and building a snacking company that stands for good in both human health and planet health. And if we can do that, then we can show other companies that they need to up their game and really start kind of questioning all the practices that they're doing. And a lot of companies are doing that. Like their subset is to really, they're taking kind of a subset of I forget what Danone or General Mills or all those guys are doing, but they are doing that to some extent. But it's really applying it systemically, and it's making sure that that's what you do universally in that company and organization. It's not just one piece you're working on. It's no, you're going to redo the entire business. And I think that's really hard to do. But that's why at Quinn, we started doing it that way. Because if you start right out of the gate and do it and grow it, it's much easier to do it. If you have to revamp a 100-year-old business, it's much, much harder to do. But if you do it right out of the gate, right, then you can do it over years. And so there is a lofty goal of us doing something really special in the industry, and creating something for the greater good.
Well, it's clear that you start with the mission, and it's very clear to me that your business started with a mission that it was pretty big, and I see and it's neat that you're able to stick with it for so many years, because one of the big challenges with something like this, and I think you've been at it for 13 years or so, but one of the big challenges is really sticking with it, because there are ups and downs that can be very difficult. One thing that interestingly, we went on a week vacation not too long ago, and as a part of that, I was reading 2 books simultaneously. I was reading Made in America by Sam Walton. Yeah. And I also was reading Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson. I love Walter Isaacson's biographies. He's one of my favorite biographers. They're always very hard to set down, you know. But I was reading both of them at the same time, in part to compare them a little bit, because I'd always thought of, and I still do, think of Sam Walton as probably the most successful entrepreneur in history. And I got a lot of reasons for that I won't go into right now, but he probably was. When you look at the changes he drove, not just in Walmart, but upstream with suppliers. And Walmart's doing all kinds of things now to drive good in many, many different ways. But one thing that was clear to me in both cases is they actually did start with a mission. And it was interesting because I was studying you and your company and preparing for this podcast. At the same time, I was reading those 2 books. And, I mean, Elon Musk really wants to save mankind through having people live in on other planets, which is, it's like he created a company around his mission. And to think that it's worked is hard to believe,
Well, you need that, though, because when things get so hard, and they were, and they have been in so many cases, you have to have that vision, because if you're focused on the then and now and just a product, then you're not going anywhere. So if you focus on the vision of what you see, like, you just have to keep staring at it no matter what happens, because you have to believe that you will get there. And I haven't read those books. I do need to read those books. Every time I'm in at Walmart in Bentonville, I go to the Walton Museum, because it just reminds me of, like, everything that he has done started from something so small, but he was so focused on this larger mission, and he did so much good in the world. And I actually have his pamphlet right by my bedside table to just remind myself, just to read it, because it is, like, it's all about standing for good in Walmart, even though whoever you talk to may or may disagree with us, right? Sure. But back then it was about that. And so I do think a mission or a vision or however you combine the two are so critical when you're trying to do something new, because you can get lost really fast if you don't have that. So that's definitely kept me going. If I didn't have that, I would be dead in the water. And also so many, self-help books too, like The Surrender Experiment. I'm a big reader. So there's all these, The Power of Now. I mean, there's so many books that I think keep you on track for sure when you hit a roadblock. That's really
true. I think a lot of successful entrepreneurs that wind up making big change do read a lot of books. I know in reading Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson, I picked up on that. He's so well read, it's mind-boggling,
Well,
Now, the pamphlet you were talking about by Sam Walton, is that the one that talks about his 10 rules for building a business?
yes, yep, exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing because he wrote that so long ago, and you see research and case studies showing that they don't say, okay, let's see if these are true, but given my work, I see research all the time in all areas of business, and I sometimes think, wow, it supports this idea that Sam had a long time ago. It's very encouraging to see you sticking with your mission, and I know, again, if you read Elon Musk or Sam Walton or any of those entrepreneurs, it took years. A lot of people think Walmart just grew real fast, but there were some challenging times, and same with Elon Musk. I mean, Tesla almost went under, SpaceX. So many of his companies have had unbelievable challenges and had to pivot, dramatically. But thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to visit with me, and I'm really encouraged by what you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. It was a lot of fun, and thanks so much.
If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors, as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.